Hi, I'm Mr. Squid School, and I've taught people things before. It's easy, as a teacher or as a coach, to focus on the process of teaching, how you explain something in words they'll understand, how to get them to practice and review and test themselves. But something that's incredibly important is also knowing what to teach and in what order. People often make the mistake of assuming that because someone's an expert at something, they'll be a great teacher for new players. The problem with that thinking is that, for example, an expert mathematician has known algebra well enough that they don't struggle with basic problems for longer than the students they're teaching algebra for the first time have been alive. They probably don't even remember the tips and tricks, the step-by-step process, the mnemonic devices their own algebra teacher used to teach them anymore. To teach well, you need a good curriculum, and more specifically, a well-tuned scope and sequence. Scope describes how deeply you're going into a subject, while sequence describes what order you're going to teach things in. I'll teach what an action verb is very early in the year, the fact that every clause needs a main verb in the middle of the year, and how a verbal phrase can play unusual roles in a clause toward the end of the year, because one aspect of verbs is easy to teach right away, but some of the greater complexity and nuance about what verbs do in English syntax requires a lot more background knowledge to understand. In something like a class teaching grammar, there are going to be a lot of resources already put together, even for a new teacher, so they can figure out what order to teach things in, but less so for something like teaching a video game. I remember becoming a community leader in my local Super Smash Bros. Melee scene, and when new players would agree at someone's encouragement to try the game out, I noticed that we had a tendency to overwhelm them. Someone would still be figuring out what the buttons do, and we'd be trying to teach them advanced techniques based on physics exploits that have complex frame-precise button inputs. This was poor sequencing. Before someone was ever going to be able to jump, wait 4 frames, and then air dodge diagonally downward, which is what you need to do to wave dash, they were going to need to get it into their muscle memory where the jump button was, and what an air dodge was, and what button to press to do it, and how to do it directionally. It was also poor sequencing because an advanced mechanic like that wasn't going to help the learner tactically until they had further knowledge of how the game was played. They first needed to understand why it was advantageous to scoot along the ground like that. By treating this technique like it was one of the basics, one of the things you needed to learn first, we were implicitly communicating that our game required a level of coordination and quick learning that a new player simply does not have, and they'd excuse themselves at the nearest socially acceptable opportunity because they would feel like it just wasn't for them. To an expert player, that technique is probably one of the coolest parts of Melee to teach someone. It's a technique unintended by the developer, discovered and optimized by players, that gives players a unique amount of freedom of movement. Maybe a beginner can be impressed by you showing off what's possible in the game, what they're working up to, but it's not reasonable to expect them to be able to access the cool stuff right away. I remember learning to ice skate as part of a class when I was a kid. What do you think was the first thing they taught us once we got our skates on? It wasn't how to get moving on a pair of skates. It wasn't how to go fast or move gracefully or how to use a hockey stick. It was how to fall down. Granted, in a physical sport, there may well be safety concerns like this that you have to address right away, but I think that this also illustrates the way to start a curriculum and build from it. You start by teaching someone about the first thing they're going to screw up. In Super Smash Bros., people who are touching a controller for the first time will generally do alright with moving toward their opponent and pressing an attack button to hit them. But you really see the panic set in when they get knocked off the stage. Nobody handles that situation well the first time. Suddenly, something they didn't expect happened. They got hit. Of course, they weren't expecting to get hit right at that moment. If they were expecting to get hit, they would have tried to avoid it. So now they're having to respond to something they didn't see coming. All of a sudden, the buttons that they pressed aren't doing what they thought they would do. They're having to figure out what actually happened once they realize it wasn't what they thought would happen, figure out where their character ended up, and then, discovering that they're falling, overcome the anxiety of needing to do something to save themselves, an anxiety that, ironically, has a tendency to cause them to forget the buttons you may or may not have told them to press in case that happens. All of a sudden, sometimes before they fully process what happened to them, let alone try to respond to it, their character is exploding. This happens to everyone that plays Super Smash Bros. For the first time, and I can say that having professionally taught the game to children, as well as their curious parents, and at a couple points to my boss and coworkers. It's the first point of friction, the first frustration they encounter, the first problem they need to solve once they can get into a game and pilot their character. This is the first thing you teach a beginning player. You teach them how to recover to the stage. I start people off with just jumping off the stage and double jumping back on. Then maybe I'll hit them off the stage and have them double jump back on. Then I'll have them stay on stage and jump, double jump, and use their character-specific recovery moves so they can learn the timing and get the button combination down. If maybe they have to know how to change the direction they're facing in midair, I'll have them practice that too. Then I'll have them jump off the stage to recover back to it. All of this happens before I put them in a match, sometimes before I even teach them what their attack moves do. Then, when they actually get knocked off stage, it'll still be difficult because it's unexpected, but it's a difficulty they were warned about, something they knew they'd need to practice. When it happens, now it's a challenge instead of an experience of having agency unexpectedly ripped away from them because they didn't know what was happening or how to respond. If you're familiar with Smash, you'll also realize that learning to recover is the single fastest way to improve at the game for a player at that skill level. If every time you get hit, you lose a stock, that drastically decreases your chances of ever hitting your opponent. Getting these second chances makes it way more likely that you can accomplish anything. That pattern tends to emerge in any skill you teach. The things you teach first are the things you need to know the most, the ones that every other skill builds on, but also the things that will get you the most mileage fastest. It's easy as a coach to fixate on something really specific that happened exactly one time during a match and spend a long time talking about the nuanced reasons why it should have been done slightly differently. Because, to our minds, those are the more interesting parts of the game to talk about. Those are the things that we're happy to flex about. Those are the things that get our brains thinking. Resist that urge, though, and think, is this knowledge what's actually going to help this student improve the fastest? This is why, at the end of all of my coaching sessions, I set 3 to 5 goals for a player to work on going forward. Now, instead of remembering that matchup-specific 1v1 tactic I spent 7 minutes explaining, I'm pointing out to them which skills I think are actually most important for them to cultivate to improve the fastest. That 7-minute explanation about that 1v1 tactic isn't going to distract them from what they really need to be working on. They're not going to take the length that it took for me to explain that thing as an indication of what's more important and what's less important for them to work on. This is also why the How to Get Out of Ranked series was structured the way that it was. I simply took a new account into C rank, wrote down all the mistakes I saw, put tally marks next to them when I saw them being repeated, and made the video about the mistakes that had the most tally marks next to them. Then I got that account up to B rank and did the same thing, and as I saw patterns emerging, I came up with names for those patterns and thought about them more so that I could explain them even more helpfully. And by the time I was done with the series, I had a curriculum. I had a scope and sequence. I knew what players needed to learn, in what order they could be expected to learn them, and I had names for the mistakes they were making that I could use to help players recognize those mistakes when they made them. You may or may not have the ability to create a Smurf account like I did, but what you certainly can do is find footage of players at lower skill levels and study it. Find a streamer or a friend who's doing Anarchy series to get out of B rank, and look at their gameplay and their opponent's gameplay. Maybe even get replay codes if they've got them. Then find someone at A rank and consider what's improved, what's different, what they're struggling with. If you're a competitive coach, go find recordings of Division 11 Ludi matches, then compare them to Division 8, then Division 6, and think about what's changing between each of them. It may also be a good idea to be more specific than that, to go from 8 to 7 to 6, because with discrete ranked groups, like the letter ranks of Anarchy Battles or Ludi divisions, whatever gets you into the next rank is what beat the rank before it. In Splatoon 2, I noticed that C rank players didn't understand the objective a lot of the time, and would roll out to unimportant parts of the map to paint like it was turf war, while the players who learned how the objective worked and tried to play it were more likely to win. That had an effect on B rank, because the players who made it out of C rank, the players who won more often in C rank, so the B rank players now, were the ones who had learned how to play the objective. So now in B rank, everyone was trying to run straight to the objective and play it right away. Players who made it to A rank were the ones who learned how to splat the B rank players who were predictably hopping up on the tower without winning an advantage first, or picking up the Rainmaker and running with it without moving the enemy team out of the way. The same iterative process is observable even at high levels of play. So even if the players you're coaching are fairly strong, it still helps to know about the players they had to beat to get to where they are. First-time teachers and coaches are going to have it a little rough, because they just don't know what their students won't know yet. It takes some time interacting with and studying students to learn what patterns of problems you're likely to need to help them with. But what you can do is learn as much as you can early on about what people screw up first, what order skills need to be taught in, to have a curriculum written out for yourself. When you watch a player or a team, figure out how far they've made it into your curriculum's sequence, what parts they might have skipped, what parts they'll need to work on next, if there's a part of your curriculum that doesn't respond to this, and how you might need to update your curriculum. Above all, what is the first thing your student needs to work on before they can refine anything else? Make sure that first thing is what you're reinforcing and giving them resources for, instead of whatever your expert brain latches onto.